for radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
Indoctrination? That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. My name is Brian Hyde, and we're going to talk about what the Uniparty fears, since the Uniparty is determined to maintain control or at least regain control from what it terms extremists here in the state of Idaho. Now, before we get there, though, there is a matter that I need you to get on your calendar. I'm going to start with this because I want this to be first and foremost in your mind. It's December. Next month, the legislative session will start, and if you really want to understand the basics of how Idaho's laws are made, here's your opportunity. As the Idaho Freedom Foundation is offering their Legislature 101 course, I believe this is completely free of charge. It's an investment of time. 7 o'clock on January 3rd. And 7 o'clock again on January 4th for Legislature 201, which is a little bit more advanced course for those who may already have taken the original Legislature 101 course and are ready to go just a little bit deeper. But if you want to find out how to sign up, I would say go to idahofreedom.org. I will be keeping you updated as well. It's essential that you understand the legislative process so that you can better utilize your influence as a citizen in influencing your legislators who ostensibly are there to reflect your views, your principles, your values. Speaking of reflecting your values, a little bit of panic here on the part of the Idaho statesmen. Those Californians moving to Idaho and Ada County, they aren't liberals, voter data shows. Well, that sounds like a great story. And actually, Clark Corbin talks about it in the Idaho Capital Sun. Voter registration data shows California Republicans, not liberals, are flocking to Idaho. Among out-of-state voters moving here, Republicans outnumber Democrats from 48 of 49 states. That is according to new data from the Secretary of State's office. I guess Phil McGrain just gave a presentation on this just a couple of days ago. But it's kind of surprising to some people because there's a perception that, well, of course, there's lots of people coming here. The secret's out. They're all coming to Idaho, and they're here to turn it into a blue state. Not so. In fact, if you talk to people, and I mean, I'm not going to say make a habit of going up to everybody you see, hey, you from around here? I mean, it sounds a lot like that nativist, I am a proud fifth-generation Idahoan, and therefore only my opinion counts. There's still a fair amount of that, and you'll see a lot of campaigning on that next year. But if you ask someone who has recently relocated to the state, particularly if they're from California, what brought you here? More often than not, you're going to find out we came here because there was more freedom. Now, the article gets into this a little bit more, so let's take a deeper dive into the Idaho Capital Sun article. With almost 30,000 California expatriates leading the charge, the number of Republican voters moving from other states to Idaho dwarfs the number of Democrats moving here from other states. A new visualization report released Wednesday morning by the Idaho Secretary of State's office maps the party affiliation of 118,702 Idaho voters who moved here from other states. Now, look, I don't think this is a big secret. Okay, it's not like, oh yeah, they snuck in, like across our unguarded borders. No, this is a matter of people who came here because there is a perception that there is greater freedom to be found here. And you know what? I don't think that's a faulty perception. I think back to, I grew up here, moved here when I was 12, moved away when I was roughly 30, and moved back just a couple of years ago after being away for nearly 25 years. I remember what Idaho was like and what it was like to grow up here in the 80s and 90s. And it was, I wouldn't say that politics drove everything. I'm sure there were some people who were politically obsessed, but there was just common sense, traditional, down-to-earth people who weren't always about, in fact, this was one of the things that made Idaho great, and I think made it an island of freedom, was the idea that you didn't get the sense that everybody existed for the sake of controlling everybody else. I get that sense right now from a lot of the people who are trying to wrest control of or maintain control of the state apparatus. And boy, do they get, nervous when someone says, hey, there ought to be limits on what you're allowed to do as a legislator. Back to the article. Let's look at what it is that brings people here. So there's a map that Osterhout generated using registration data for voters who moved from other states to Idaho. And Well, it's something of a Republican fever dream, a red wave in 48 of 49 states. Now, regardless of where the voters are coming from or how liberal that state is, Republican voters greatly outnumber Democratic voters moving here from every state except Vermont. On the map, Vermont is shaded gray to reflect that 60 unaffiliated voters and 51 Democrats from Vermont outnumber the 50 Republican voters who moved to Vermont, or moved from Vermont, rather, to Idaho. So here's what that map looks like, just so you can get an idea. Yep, way up there in the upper right-hand corner, there's Vermont. You know, and it shows, but look at all the varying grades of red of people, you know, who moved to the state of Idaho. Now, I maintain this is more due to the fact that there's a perception that you can have greater freedom here. And I hate to pick open an old wound, but when it comes to COVID, initially, no thanks, Governor Little, for locking everything down and strictly insisting that these things be enforced. Idaho was quicker to return to normal. And again, that wasn't the governor's doing. That was people just saying, enough. We've had enough. Things got back to normal much, much quicker here. And that's one of the reasons that when I was looking to move back, I was very excited because I wanted to go back to the normal world. I was tired of seeing people hiding behind masks and, again, thinking that it's their prerogative to go boss everybody else around. So back to Clark Corbin's article. Everywhere else is a sea of red without Republicans outnumbering Democrats and unaffiliated voters moving to Idaho from every state. According to the data, among all Idaho voters who moved here from out of state, you'll see about 65% are registered Republicans, 21% are unaffiliated, 12% say they're registered Democrats, and roughly 2% are members of a third party like the Constitution Party or Libertarian Party. Now, don't read too much into the fact that, well, there's only this many of this. You know, a lot of people don't wear their politics on their shirt sleeves, and frankly, they're probably better people to be around than the ones who do. But the question remains, what's the draw? Why do they move here? Now, almost 30,000 Republicans have moved to Idaho from California, and they say the data appears to confirm one myth and then bust another. I thought this was interesting. First, at least among registered voters, ex-Californians leading the surge of people moving from other states to Idaho. That's the rule. It's not even close. The report shows 39,558 Idaho voters moved here from California, and 29,516 of those voters, or roughly 75%, are Republicans. This compares to 39,400 voters. 3,900 California voters who moved here and registered as Democrats. Yeah, about, almost a 10-to-1 ratio here. There are 11,047 ex-California voters registered as Republicans just in Ada County alone. Now, again, you have to ask the question, so what brings them here? If you look at the top states in terms of most and least net domestic population migration from July 2021 to July 2022, the states that had people flowing to them: Florida, Texas, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, Arizona, Idaho, Alabama, Oklahoma. Just off the top of your head, do any of those states really strike you as, oh yeah, those are definitely blue states? I think left-wingers when I think of those states. No, not really. But when you look at the bottom 10 states in terms of domestic population migration, meaning that people are leaving those states, California. I don't know if you saw the poo map that Ron DeSantis held up in his debate with Gavin Newsom, but yeah, for San Francisco residents at least, no wonder they want to get out of there. New York, Illinois, taxing people right out of the state. New Jersey, Massachusetts, Louisiana, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Minnesota. There are a couple in there that I'm a little bit like, really, Pennsylvania and Virginia? Maybe because I'm thinking more of, kind of the blue collar stuff. But then again, that voting bloc may lean a little more Democrat. I don't know if they still do, but for the most part, you are talking about states that are hardcore blue states, whereas the places where people are going tend to be fairly hardcore red states. I don't know if people need to be hardcore in this, but there you go. Now, it brings to us the idea that, well, there's got to be some way to counter, this movement of Republicans, because we don't want the Republican, we want Idaho to get even redder, and the Republican Party to get even stronger. This is why ranked choice voting and open primaries are going to be a huge, huge issue in the coming year. These voters, according to Gordon Pasha, have lived the mess that Democrats have wreaked on California. They don't want any part of the Democratic or Rhino agenda. Okay, they've already seen that, been there, done that. Hence the push by the latter for ranked choice voting. The Democrats and the rhinos are the ones who want ranked choice voting. Why? Because they can't win otherwise. Just a little something to think about. Idaho Liberty Dog says, conservatives thinking of moving to Idaho? Listen to this. You are welcomed here. The more of you that move here, the more the Democrats become irrelevant and the redder our state turns. By the way, they say Boise's a great place to start. Make Boise great again. Oh boy, that's going to cause some people some palpitation. So it's no surprise conservative voters from progressive states are coming to Idaho. In fact, several real estate agents are marketing Idaho homes to conservatives living in heavily populated progressive states like California, Washington, and Oregon. That's according to the Associated Press in 2022. Jacqueline Kettler, a Boise State University political scientist who researches and teaches about government and elections, says the data is helpful for taking stock of how Idaho's rapid growth has affected the state. All right, fair enough. By the way, fueled by people moving from other states, Idaho was the second fastest growing state in the country in 2022. One of the fastest growing states in the country between 2010 and 2020, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. Kettler says Osterhout's findings are in line with survey data and other reports that she's seen. I get why people want to move here. And I really do believe that the reason most of them come is because there is a perception that I will be more free when I come to Idaho. Not, I just need to go somewhere where someone can tell me, what to do and how to live my life. I know the rhinos and the political left portray and anybody who puts limits on government power as an extremist of some kind. Well, you guys are going to take over the government and then just leave everybody alone, as opposed to telling them, what to do with their lives and every step that they can take and everything they should ask permission for and everything they can be taxed on, right? Surprising number of rhinos really seem to favor this. Why? I guess it's just that need for control. Back to Clark Corbin's article here. He says a coalition of groups, including Reclaim Idaho and Mormon Women for Ethical Government, is gathering signatures for a ballot initiative seeking to end Idaho's closed primary elections. Now, they're trying to replace it with a top 4 primary election, open to all candidates and all voters, and a ranked choice system for the general election, where the voters pick their favorite candidate and can rank the remaining 3 candidates on their ballot in order of preference. Why, it sounds so open, it sounds so inviting. But it's unnecessarily complicated. And that's a feature, not a bug. Senator Brian Lenny says political parties are foundational to our democratic republic because they're built on the freedom of association, and this freedom is non-negotiable. You either have it or you don't. We wouldn't dictate how the Masons choose their grand master or tell a congregation how to vote on their pastor. So in the same vein, we can't impose our view on political parties when it comes to how they select their candidates. Fair enough. He says parties are private entities with the right to determine their own course. Their members, united by common principles, have the exclusive right to decide who will lead and who will represent their agenda. The public exercises their power at the ballot box, choosing from the candidates the parties have put forth. And so, Senator Lenny says, interfering with a party's private and internal decisions erodes the independence of all political groups and, by extension, the very fabric of our freedoms. Again, this is really straightforward stuff. And again, the crazy thing about this is that people sell this ranked choice voting as this, well, it's this great way to get everybody involved. And you just have to think and be a little bit more strategic about how you cast your vote. But I'm failing to see how that is actually a net positive in terms of, making a citizen's voice heard. And I love the commentary that was provided here in a great online discussion. Josh White has some really good explanations here, answering one person's concerns about how could this be a big deal? Other states have done it. He says, look, here's the real issue. Criticism of ranked choice voting isn't just shrugged off as ignorance. In other words, they're telling people, you just don't know how the system works. It's a sign of intentional flaws within the system. And that complex design isn't by accident. It's by design to confuse and obscure. So take the case of Alaska, which has ranked choice voting. It's not just about candidate popularity. It's a clear example of how ranked choice voting's intentional complexity can twist outcomes. And when we call this out, we're dismissed as uninformed. Herp, derp, you don't understand how elections work. And that's precisely the intent, to make it so complex that no one understands how it works. Even the most blatant violations are just part of the process. It isn't a flaw, it's a tactic. In other words, ranked choice voting isn't about enhancing democracy, it's about controlling it. Now, in another point that he's making, he says, here's the breakdown. Ranked choice voting can distort true voter representation because it's not straightforward, like one person, one vote. And I would add, on paper, in person. That's pretty hard to falsify. Instead, it can lead to a convoluted ranking system where initial minority preferences can override majority choices. This manipulation of the voting process doesn't necessarily reflect the true will of the people. It's less about fair competition and more about creating a system where the outcome can be steered by those who understand how to game it. And that's why it's problematic. And that's why the proponents of ranked choice voting are so determined to bring this up and make it the law and make it, the standard in Idaho, because it will be so much easier to manipulate. And then when somebody does complain, they can just say, you just don't understand how it works. I'm reminded of Burt Gummer from Tremors. Remember the survivalist played by Michael Gross? And he has an encounter with an EPA bureaucrat at some point, and he has this wonderful quote about something, well, isn't that just like government? To take something simple and complicate it. Only in this case, it's not government that's doing it. It's people who wish to control government that are trying to take something simple and complicate it so that they can game the system to their advantage. Now, I have to admit, ranked choice voting, or open primaries, more appropriately, the open primaries proponents do have a point when it comes to the fact that people will say, well, look, the state is providing funding for this. And it's true. The parties should back away from taking state funding. In fact, the state really shouldn't be doing this. This is something the parties should be taking care of themselves, because any money that passes through government hands is going to come with strings attached. And I know some people think that's a good thing. I'm not one of them. But if you want to put the process above reproach, the state needs to be taken out of, that funding so that it can truly be private organizations. So I have to concede the point to those proponents of open primaries. Well, there's taxpayer money involved. You're right, there is, and there shouldn't be. But it doesn't change the fact that those parties are still private organizations. And then we have the matter of people changing their party affiliation so that they can better game the system. I'm going to show you an example of this. Here is someone who, Alicia Lynn Abbott, is registered to vote, registered as a Republican. Would you care to see how Alicia describes herself in terms of her voting? Yep. Radical leftist Republican. P.S. Open the primary so I won't have to affiliate in exchange for my right to vote. In other words, I don't support anything about your platform, but I will play along and pretend that I am a Republican in order to participate in the system, in order to game the system. Does that seem right? Is that ethical to you? Does that seem like something that, if everybody did that, we'd be a better place and, everything would be much more straightforward, less misunderstandings, less conflict? Hardly. It's deceptive. And frankly, I think you're going to see a lot of these instances where people have boasted, look at me, now I'm a Republican, when they know darn well they have nothing in common, and they have no fealty to the idea that there are certain principles that the Republican Party represents. They just want the power. And it's all about sheer numbers. If we have enough numbers, we can do whatever we're going to do. Well, might doesn't make right. I know there are people who believe that, right? But by that standard, if that's true, well, in this case, the strongest party won. Well, if that's the standard we're going to go by, then I guess we'll have to admit Stalin really was a good leader. Yeah, he killed tens of millions of people, but my gosh, he won, didn't he? Same with Chairman Mao, same with Pol Pot, Idi Amin, anybody else? Yeah. Might doesn't make right. What's right is right. What's wrong is wrong. But politics always seeks to blur that line, and sometimes we need a little bit of clarity. Speaking of clarity, I'm going to finish on this note. We're hearing rumors about, there's a mystery illness in China, and they're really concerned about this. And it's the usual suspects. In other words, it's the people who pushed lockdowns. It's the people who pushed mandates. It's the people who pushed the vaccine. And by the way, now are backtracking. We never forced anybody to do it. That was all their choice. Gaslighting son of a guns, I'll tell you what. But there's a rule here that comes to mind, and that is, in fact, I'm going to let Dr. Martin Koldorf explain this best of all. If they were wrong, if they lied to us, and they cannot find it in their hearts to say, look, we were wrong about this and we want to set the record straight. He asks, when governments lied about COVID, how can we trust them on other things? And this is a legal principle, falsus in uno, falsus in omnibus. A legal principle that someone who lied on one matter should not be trusted on other matters. Think about that as you hear the press start to hype, oh boy, mystery illness, fear. You got your mask? Have you been vaxxed? Should we lock it all down again? You'll understand at that point that our answer is not only no, but hell no. That's not the right thing. Stay strong, stay informed, and thanks again for tuning in to Nowhere to Hide.